The moment Tessa Harlow put Vincent Caruso on the floor of his own restaurant, she knew her life would never be the same. One second he was laughing, his ringed hand wrapped around her wrist like she was something he'd picked up off the pavement. The next, he was staring up at the coffered ceiling of Caruso's, gasping, his $7,000 suit jacket splayed open like wings on a broken bird. She stood over him, smoothing her apron with both hands, her breathing steady. Around them, the entire dining room had gone church quiet. "I asked you to let go," she said softly. "Twice. That was a Thursday night in late October in the kind of Toronto restaurant where the bread costs $18 and the wine list is a small novel. Tessa had been working there for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of keeping her head down, her hands busy, and her past buried somewhere she hoped no one would think to dig. She needed the job, not in the way people say they need jobs. In the way where your younger brother is 17 and diabetic, and the insulin costs more than your rent and you've already sold the car. The dining room at Caruso's was the kind of place where men like Vincent Caruso held court every Friday. But on Thursdays he came in quietly, just 4 bodyguards and a table in the back corner that was never, under any circumstances, given to anyone else. Tessa had learned that on her first shift, she'd also learned not to make eye contact, not to linger, and to refill the water glasses before anyone had to ask. She had been doing everything right. Then he grabbed her wrist. It wasn't the first time a man in that dining room had reached for her. It wasn't even the worst, but something about the way he did it, unhurried, certain, like he was picking something off a shelf he owned, had bypassed every careful layer she'd built over the last 3 years. Her body responded before her brain finished the sentence. Step in, off balance, lock the joint, sweep, crack. The sound his elbow made against the marble floor was not subtle. She was aware, distantly, of the gasp that moved through the room like a wave, of the 4 bodyguards on their feet, of the maitre d' making a sound like a punctured tire. She was aware of all of it, and she kept her eyes on Vincent Caruso, who was lying on his back, looking at her with an expression she had never seen on a man like him before. Not rage. Not yet. Something more dangerous than rage. Curiosity. "Get her out," said the largest of the bodyguards, a man with a jaw like a cinder block, already moving toward her. "Don't." Caruso's voice came from the floor. Calm. Almost amused. The bodyguard stopped like hit a wall. Caruso sat up slowly, cradling his arm. He looked at Tessa the way you'd look at something unexpected in a museum. A painting you didn't expect to affect you. "Who taught you that?" he asked. "Nobody," Tessa said. "I'm going to need you to not press charges, Mr. Caruso. I can't afford a lawyer." He laughed. It was a real laugh, not a performance. It startled her almost as much as the grab had startled her. She didn't wait for anything else. She untied her apron, dropped it on the nearest chair, and walked through the kitchen and out the rear door into the alley behind King Street. The cold hit her like a wall. She stood in it for a moment, her hands shaking. Not from fear, but from the particular crash that comes after adrenaline burns through you and leaves nothing behind. Her phone buzzed. Her brother. "Danny, you coming home for dinner?" She typed back, "Yeah, give me an hour." She had just lost the only job she'd managed to hold for more than a month. She found another one the next morning, at a diner on Dundas, cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like ambition gave up. She was 3 hours into her first shift when the black SUV pulled up outside and a man in a grey coat walked in and sat at the counter and ordered nothing. He put a business card on the formica in front of her. Just a name and a phone number. V. Caruso. "He'd like to speak with you," the man said. He had the kind of face that had stopped expressing things a long time ago. Tessa dried her hands on a dish towel. "Tell him I'm working. He owns this building." A pause. "He owns most of the block." She looked at the card for a long moment. Then she picked it up and put it in her apron pocket and went back to refilling coffee. She called the number that night after Danny was asleep, sitting on the fire escape with her coat on and her breath making small clouds in the October dark. The voice that answered wasn't Caruso's. It was a woman's voice, brisk and professional. She said Mr. Caruso would like to offer Miss Harlow a meeting, at her convenience, to discuss a matter of mutual interest. She said it the way people say things when the word mutual is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Tessa said Tuesday. The woman said tomorrow. Tessa said Tuesday again. There was a pause, and then the woman said Tuesday would be fine. She spent the 2 days between wondering if she was being stupid. The thing was, she already knew who Vincent Caruso was. She'd known before she applied at the restaurant. She'd known the way you know things when you've spent 3 years in a government building reading files you were never supposed to see, under a classification that no longer protected her because the unit that issued it had, 18 months ago, disavowed her existence entirely. She wasn't supposed to know about Caruso's connection to the Port Authority. She wasn't supposed to know about the shipping manifests, the shell companies, the quiet arrangement between his operation and 3 separate city councillors. She had known all of it because it was her job to know, right up until it wasn't her job anymore. And 2 of her former colleagues tried to make sure she couldn't tell anyone what she'd learned. She'd gotten out of that situation by being harder to kill than they expected. She'd gotten into the restaurant by being good at looking like someone who didn't know anything at all. The meeting was at his offices in a tower on Bay Street that looked like it was built to make people feel small. She went up 42 floors in an elevator lined with pale wood, and was shown into a corner office where Vincent Caruso was standing at the window looking at the lake. He turned when she came in. His arm was in a compression sleeve. He didn't mention it. "Sit down, Miss Harlow," he said. "I'll stand, thanks." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. He sat behind his desk, which put her at a slight height advantage, and she understood that he'd done it deliberately, the way powerful men occasionally made small concessions to appear reasonable. He was, she noted with the detached part of her brain that catalogued things whether she wanted it to or not, a difficult man to look at neutrally. He was somewhere in his early 40s, dark-haired, with the kind of stillness that either came from a lot of yoga or from being genuinely dangerous. She suspected it wasn't yoga. "You put me on the floor of my own restaurant," he said. "You grabbed me without consent." "I did." He said it without apology, but also without defensiveness. "I wanted to see how you'd react." He looked at her steadily. "Where did you train?" "Community Center on Bloor. They have a good self-defense program, Tessa." He said her name like he'd been saying it for years, easy and precise. "I ran your name through 4 different databases. Tessa Harlow doesn't exist before 2021. The room felt very still. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass, a plane crossed the grey sky over the lake. "That's from Sudbury. I have a birth certificate." "You have an excellent birth certificate," he corrected. "Whoever made it knows what they're doing. But the woman who was born in Sudbury 31 years ago has no digital footprint before 3 years ago. No social media, no credit history, no employment records before a bookshop in Kensington Market that closed before anyone could verify your tenure." He leaned forward, his forearms on the desk. "What I'm wondering is whether you came into my restaurant by accident or whether you came in because of what I do." "I came in," Tessa said, "because you were hiring and I needed money." "For what?" She didn't answer. He watched her for a long moment. "I have a younger sister," he said. "She's been sick since she was 12. I understand needing money for reasons that aren't about yourself." It was a strange thing for him to say. She didn't let it land anywhere important. "What do you want, Mr. Caruso?" "I want to know who you are." He stood, walking to the window again. He was tall, she noticed. Tall and controlled in the way of someone who'd been in enough rooms where the wrong movement cost things. "And I want to offer you a job. I have a job. You have a diner shift at a building I own, which means technically you're already working for me." He glanced at her over his shoulder. "I'm offering something that pays better and uses more of what you actually know. You don't know what I know. I know you disarmed a man twice your size in under 2 seconds without breaking a sweat. I know you checked the exits when you walked in here." He turned fully. "I know you're not afraid of me, which means either you're very brave or you know enough about my business to understand that I'm not the thing you're most afraid of." The silence between them was the kind that had weight. "Head of personal security," he said. "My current head retired unexpectedly." What does unexpectedly mean in that sentence? It means he was selling my schedule to someone I'd rather not have it. His jaw was tight. "I need someone I haven't known for 20 years. Someone who hasn't had time to be bought." "You don't know me." "No," he said, "but you know me." That's more useful right now. She should have said no. She had a plan, and it didn't involve becoming more entangled with a man whose organization was the reason her old unit had burned her. But the plan also required access to things she didn't currently have access to, and the door he was opening, even if he didn't know it, led directly to the room she needed to get into. "2 conditions," she said. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "I work my own hours on Saturdays, non-negotiable, and you never grab my wrist again." "Done," he said without hesitation. He held out his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief, and he let go immediately, which was either respect or a very sophisticated play. She didn't know yet which one. The first 2 weeks were professional and carefully bordered. She reviewed his security arrangements and found 3 gaps that genuinely alarmed her, which she told him about in a memo that he read in front of her without speaking for 4 full minutes. She restructured the rotation of his personal detail. She attended 2 meetings where she stood at the back wall and said nothing, and watched how the other men in the room treated him and how he treated them back. She learned things. She also got access to the building's server room on her 3rd day, under the pretext of reviewing the security camera network, and spent 11 minutes copying data she'd been looking for a year and a half. What she found on that drive was worse than she'd expected. It wasn't just her name in the files. It was a whole architecture of corruption, her former unit's connection to a man named Paul Drummond, who ran a private intelligence consulting firm, and who had, 18 months ago, decided that the evidence Tessa had accidentally assembled made her too dangerous to keep employed and too knowledgeable to leave alive. The files had Drummond's payments, his contacts, the names of the 3 city officials who'd helped him bury a shipping investigation that would have exposed the whole structure. And there, in a folder she almost missed, was Vincent Caruso's name, not as a participant, as a target. Drummond had been building a case against Caruso for 2 years, not to prosecute him, but to leverage him, to use the threat of exposure as a way to fold Caruso's distribution network into Drummond's own operation. Caruso didn't know. Tessa sat in her car in the underground parking garage and looked at her laptop screen for a long time. She could take this to a journalist. She could take it to the RCMP. She could disappear to the West Coast and let it all implode without her. She could also tell him. She didn't tell him. Not that night. She went home and made pasta and helped Danny with his chemistry homework and didn't sleep until 3 in the morning. She told him the following Monday in his office with the door closed. She put the laptop on his desk and let him read. He read in the same silence he'd used for the security memo, except this time his jaw was set in a way that was different from professional. This was personal. She could see the moment he found his own name in the leverage file. His hands didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. "Where did you get this?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Your server room." He looked at her. "I was going to take it and go," she said. "I'm telling you because it turns out you're collateral damage in something that started with me, and I can't." She stopped. "It seemed like the right thing to do. What started with you?" She told him. "Not everything, not yet, but enough. The unit, the files, Drummond, the 2 men who'd shown up at her apartment 18 months ago with instructions she'd made certain they couldn't carry out. The new identity, Danny, the insulin, the restaurant, and the 6 weeks of keeping her head down, trying to get close enough to find the one piece of documentation that would prove she'd been framed." He listened without interrupting, which was unusual in her experience of men who owned towers on Bay Street. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Paul Drummond," he said, "is coming to Toronto on Friday. He has a meeting scheduled with 2 of those counselors." He turned the laptop toward her and pointed at a name in the calendar data she'd pulled. "He's staying at the Ritz. I've known him professionally for 4 years. He reached out 8 months ago about a partnership I declined. He's already started the play," Tessa said. "Yes, he'll have people watching you. Yes, he may already have someone inside your organization." "I know. I've suspected it for 6 weeks. I hired you in part because you were the only variable I hadn't introduced myself." He looked at her directly. "I need to know if you're a variable Drummond introduced. If I were," Tessa said, "I would not have shown you that file. It was the play. If it was the play, you're already in too much trouble for it to matter." She held his gaze. "I'm not Drummond's. I'm not anyone's." That's the whole problem. Something shifted in the room. The quality of the silence changed. "All right," he said. "All right? I believe you." He said it simply, like it was an operational decision he'd made and was done making. "What do you need?" She pulled up a second folder on the laptop. "I need 48 hours, access to your contacts at the Port Authority, and I need you to take that Friday meeting with Drummond." His eyes moved over the screen. "You want to use me as bait. I want to let him think his play is working. I want him to believe you're considering his offer. While he's focused on you, I get into his consultant firm's secure server." She paused. "There's a document, a deposition, recorded, signed, with witnesses, that my former unit director gave to Drummond as insurance. It names names, including mine, as part of a fraud I didn't commit. If I can get the original file and the authentication key, I can prove it was fabricated. I can clear myself. And Drummond loses the leverage he's been building on half of downtown Toronto." Caruso looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the city moved in its usual indifferent way, cranes and traffic and cloud. "You've been planning this since before the restaurant," he said. "Since before the restaurant. You knew working for me would give you access." "Yes. And you still told me about the file." "Yes." He stood and walked to the window. She'd noticed he did this when he was thinking, put the room behind him and looked at the sky. "My father used to say that the most dangerous person in any room is the one with nothing left to lose." He turned. "You have your brother. I know, that's not nothing. I know that too." Her voice was quieter than she intended it to be. He nodded once, a decision made. "Tell me what you need me to do on Friday." The meeting at the Ritz was at 7 in the evening, in a private dining room on the 2nd floor. Tessa was in the hotel 4 hours early. She'd arranged the entry point through a linen service contractor. whose employee schedule she'd restructured as part of a facilities review that Caruso's office had requested 3 days ago. She moved through the service corridors like she'd worked there for years, which was a skill that took longer to learn than the fighting and was, in her experience, more useful. Drummond's team had 4 people in the hotel. She made them within the first hour. 2 in the lobby, 1 outside the private dining room, 1 on the floor above in a room that had a direct line of sight to the corridor. She adjusted accordingly. The server room access point was a maintenance panel behind the ice machine on the 14th floor. She'd have 12 minutes before the network access would flag as anomalous. She needed 9. She was on minute 8 when her earpiece, a single wireless bud she'd bought herself, connected to Caruso's personal phone, let her hear his voice from downstairs. He was good at it, better than she'd expected. He sat across from Paul Drummond and discussed hypotheticals in a tone of careful consideration, the performance of a man who might be interested, who was weighing his options, who hadn't already been told exactly what Drummond was building. She listened to him work while she worked, and there was something strange about it. Something she didn't have a word for yet, the sensation of being in 2 places at once with 1 person. The authentication key was in a folder inside a folder inside a folder, labeled with an accounting date from 6 years ago. She found it in minute 11. She copied it, closed the access point, replaced the panel, and was in the elevator before the flag could register. She sent him a text as she walked through the lobby past the 2 men who didn't know who she was. Done. Exit when ready. Downstairs, she heard his voice shift, warmer, conclusive, the sound of a meeting being wrapped up with the promise of a follow-up that would never come. She was outside on the street, cold air, and the smell of exhaust and wet pavement when her phone rang, not a text. A call, which he almost never did. "It's him," Caruso said without preamble. "He has someone in my office." He said something in there that he could only have known from an internal communication from last week. "Someone on my own team, I know," she said. "I think it's your logistics coordinator, Hartley. I flagged it in the security review 2 weeks ago, but I didn't want to move on it without more. You flagged it. Page 4 of the memo. I said to audit his communication history." A pause. Another pause. Then, remarkably, he almost laughed. It was a short sound, more air than voice, but it was real. "Where are you?" "Outside. North entrance." She saw the door open 30 seconds later. He came out without his coat, which struck her as a very human thing about a man who was otherwise quite careful about surfaces. He stopped on the pavement and looked at her, and in the hotel light his face was plainer than it usually was, stripped of the careful neutrality he wore in rooms with other people. "Do you have it?" he asked. She held up the small drive. He looked at it, then at her. "What happens now? I take this to a journalist I trust and a civil liberties lawyer I used to know. Drummond's leverage collapses. My file gets corrected. Hartley gets handed to the RCMP with a ribbon on him. And Drummond loses the play, loses the city contracts he was building toward. It'll take a year to fully unwind, but the structure collapses without the leverage." She tucked the drive back into her jacket pocket. "His organization has enough exposure in the files that he won't come after me. It's not worth it to him." Caruso nodded. He was quiet for a moment. "What about you?" he said. After, once you're clear, once your name is corrected." He looked at the street, traffic going past, a streetcar groaning around the corner. "What do you do?" Tessa thought about her apartment. The fire escape, Danny sleeping with his door open because he'd done that since their mother left and it hadn't changed. The insulin in the fridge. The $10 diner and the cracked vinyl and the relief she'd felt every morning for 6 weeks when she walked into the restaurant. Because at least for those hours, she knew exactly what she was, and nobody was looking for her. She thought about the 42 floors of pale wood elevator, and the security memo nobody finished reading, and the peculiar sensation of hearing his voice in her ear while she worked, like a frequency she'd tuned into without meaning to. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. Caruso reached into his jacket and held out an envelope. She looked at it without taking it. 6 weeks of wages, he said. "At the rate I should have offered you from the beginning." She took it. The weight of it was more than 6 weeks of anything she'd made in recent memory. "And," he said, and his voice changed just slightly, became less transactional, "there's still a position if you want it. No deception required this time. No data you need to steal, just the work." She looked at him. In the cold and the streetlight, he was just a man, which was a strange thing to feel about someone who'd taken up this much room in the last 3 weeks of her life. "You trust me," she said. "After all of this, you showed me the file," he said simply. When you didn't have to, she thought about that. The choice had seemed clear in the moment and less clear afterward and clear again now. "I'd need Saturdays," she said. "You mentioned, and I picked the team. No legacy hires from the old structure. Agreed. and you actually read the full memo next time." This time it was a real smile, brief and oddly genuine, the kind that happened to a face rather than being deployed by it. "I'll finish it this weekend." She nodded. She didn't say yes, not exactly. But she didn't say anything else either, and he seemed to understand that they'd arrived somewhere that didn't need a formal word put to it. The streetcar groaned past again. Somewhere down the block, a restaurant exhaled warmth and noise through an opening door. "I should get home," Tessa said. "My brother's got a test tomorrow. I'll have the car take you. I'll take the streetcar." He looked like he might say something and then didn't. She started walking toward the stop, her hands in her pockets, the drive in her breast pocket next to her heartbeat. "Tessa," he called. She looked back. "For what it's worth," Caruso said, standing outside the hotel without his coat in the October cold, looking less like the man who owned the building and more like someone who'd just been surprised by something. "You were the most interesting thing to happen to me in a very long time." She considered that for a moment. "You grabbed my wrist in a restaurant," she said. "You've set a low bar for yourself." But she was almost smiling when she turned back to the streetcar stop, and she didn't look back again, and all the way home on the rattling car with the city sliding past the fogged windows, she kept thinking about the word interesting, and what it costs to use it honestly, and what it might mean when someone like him means it about someone like her. She'd find out, she supposed. She had the drive, she had the documentation, she had Danny, and the whole rest of the winter, and for the first time in a year and a half, something that felt cautiously, dangerously close to a future. That was enough. That was more than she'd walked into a restaurant on King Street expecting to find.